The rope whistled through the air before it struck flesh again and again, until the sound became a rhythm that matched the beating of hearts in the crowd, hearts that had turned to stone. Margaret Walsh counted silently. 97. 98. Her back was raw meat. The coarse fabric of what remained of her dress stuck to wounds that would never fully heal, not the ones on her skin, nor the ones carved into her soul. 99. The man with the whip, Samuel Hodge, the blacksmith, paused to wipe sweat from his brow. The October sun hung low over the Kansas prairie, painting the river red as blood. Or perhaps that was just her vision blurring. 100. The final strike landed, and Margaret's knees finally gave way. She had held herself upright through it all, refusing to cry out, refusing to give them the satisfaction. The rope binding her wrists to the post was cut, and she crumpled into the mud at the river's edge. "Let it be known," Mayor Cornelius Blackwood's voice boomed across the gathering, "that Margaret Walsh has paid for her sin of barrenness. 3 years wed, and no child to show, the Lord's judgment is clear." The crowd began to disperse. Women pulled their shawls tighter, men spat tobacco into the dirt, some lingered, whispering behind cupped hands. Margaret heard fragments, cursed, worthless, better off dead. Her husband, former husband now, she supposed, Theodore Walsh, stood among them, his new bride, to be clutching his arm. Young Sarah Morton, barely 16, with wide hips and the promise of fertility written in her blooming cheeks. Theodore didn't look back as they walked away. The sun dipped lower, and still Margaret lay there, cheek pressed to the cool mud. The river murmured beside her, indifferent to her suffering. She could roll into it, let the current take her. It would be so easy. But she didn't cry. She hadn't cried when the physician pronounced her womb diseased. Hadn't cried when Theodore took up with the Morton girl. Hadn't cried through 100 lashes. She wouldn't cry now. Miles upriver, Caleb Stone was beginning to worry. His youngest, 7-year-old Emma, had wandered off again. The girl's got her late mother's curiosity and twice her stubbornness. "Sarah, you seen your sister?" He called to his eldest, 13, and already taking on the household duties that should have been her mother's. She said something about finding pretty rocks by the river. "Pa!" Caleb cursed under his breath. The sun would be down soon, and October nights came swift and cold. He grabbed his rifle, not for Emma, but for whatever might find her first. Wolves had been spotted near the riverbank last week. "Thomas, you're in charge," he told his 10-year-old son. "Keep the fire going, I'll be back." He followed the river path, calling Emma's name. His voice echoed off the cottonwoods, startling a murder of crows into flight. The dying light turned everything to shadow and gold. "Emma! Emma Stone, you answer me right now." A small voice finally piped up. "Pa! Pa, come quick!" He found her standing over something, someone, at the river's edge. His first thought was a body washed downstream. Then he saw the torn dress, the blood, the careful pattern of wounds. "Emma, get back!" "But Pa, she's hurt bad." Caleb knelt beside the woman, gently turning her face from the mud. She was breathing, barely. Her back was... Lord Almighty! He had seen men flogged in the army, but never like this. Never with such deliberate cruelty. "Who did this to you?" Margaret's eyes fluttered open, gray eyes like storm clouds. She tried to speak, but only managed to croak. "Don't try to talk." Caleb's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking for broken bones, assessing damage. "Emma, give me your apron." "But Pa." "Now, girl." He dipped the fabric in river water, gently cleaning mud from the woman's face. She winced but didn't cry out. "Can you sit up? We need to get you somewhere safe." Margaret nodded weakly. With Caleb's support, she managed to rise to her knees, then her feet. The world spun, but she stayed upright through sheer will. "What's your name?" "Margaret." Her voice was raw. Margaret Walsh was Walsh. Caleb had heard of the Walshes. Theodore ran the feed store in town. But this This wasn't Theodore's doing. I'm taking you to my place. It's not far. Emma, run ahead and tell Sarah to heat water. Lots of it. Yes, Pa. The girl scampered off, blonde braids bouncing. Caleb draped his coat around Margaret's shoulders, careful not to touch her back. Can you walk? I didn't cry, she whispered. What? 100 lashes. I didn't cry. Something in her voice, pride mixed with devastation, made Caleb's chest tighten. No, I don't suppose you did. The walk to his cabin took forever. Margaret leaned on him when she had to, pulled away when she could manage alone. By the time they reached the small homestead, full dark had fallen. Sarah met them at the door, eyes wide with shock. Pa, what? No questions now. Just help me get her inside. The cabin was simple, but clean. Elizabeth's touches still lingered. The quilt she'd sewn, dried flowers in a jar, her Bible on the mantel. Caleb guided Margaret to a chair by the fire. Sarah, those waters ready? Yes, Pa. I've got cloth for bandages, too. Good girl, just like her mother, always thinking ahead. Thomas, take Emma to the loft. This isn't for young eyes. But Pa! Mind me, boy. Caleb had seen plenty of wounded folks, but treating a woman, especially with wounds like these, required delicacy. Sarah helped Margaret out of the ruined dress, both of them working in respectful silence. The full extent of the damage made Caleb's jaw clench. Whoever had done this had taken their time, made sure each strike would scar. This wasn't punishment. It was torture. Sarah, honey, and whiskey from the shelf. As they cleaned and dressed the wounds, Margaret never made a sound. Her face was carved from stone, but Caleb noticed how her hands trembled. Why? He finally asked. Why did they do this? Quote, Margaret stared into the fire. 3 years married, no babies. Town decided I was cursed. Barren. The word came out like poison. Theodore wanted a divorce and a new wife. Mayor said I had to pay for my sin first. Sin? Sarah's young voice was incredulous. What sin is not having babies? Hush, Sarah, Caleb said gently. But the girl was right to be outraged. When they finished, Margaret was dressed in one of Elizabeth's old nightgowns, her wounds covered in honey-soaked bandages. She sat rigid in the chair, as if relaxing might break her apart. You'll stay here tonight, Caleb said. I can't. You can, and you will. Sarah, make up the bed in your room. You'll sleep by the fire tonight. I don't mind, Pa. As Sarah bustled about, Margaret finally looked at Caleb properly. He was perhaps 35, with the weathered face of a man who worked the land and the gentle hands of one who'd raised children alone. His dark hair needed cutting, and his clothes were patched but clean. Why are you helping me? Caleb considered the question. My Elizabeth used to say that the measure of a person isn't in how they treat their equals, but how they treat those the world's cast aside. Your wife? Fever took her 2 winters back. I'm sorry. So am I, he said simply. But sorry doesn't get the crops in or the children raised. We do what we must. Sarah returned. Bed's ready, Miss Walsh. Just Margaret. She tried to stand, swayed, and Caleb caught her elbow. Easy now. Sarah, help her to bed. I'll check on you in the morning. As the women disappeared into the back room, Caleb stoked the fire and tried not to think about the kind of people who'd count out 100 lashes on a woman's back. Tried not to think about how she'd held herself with such fierce dignity despite everything. From the loft, Emma's voice drifted down. Pa, is the lady going to be all right? I hope so, little one. Now, sleep. But Caleb himself sat up long into the night, rifle across his knees, watching the door. If anyone came looking for Margaret Walsh, they'd have to go through him first, and unlike the good people of town, he still remembered what it meant to be human. The fever came in the night. Margaret thrashed in the narrow bed, caught between waking and nightmare, her back on fire despite the cooling honey dressings. Sarah kept vigil, replacing damp cloths on Margaret's forehead, whispering prayers her mother had taught her. I didn't cry, Margaret muttered over and over. Didn't give them, didn't. Dawn broke gray and cold. Caleb found his daughter asleep in the chair beside Margaret's bed, her hand still clutching a washcloth. He gently shook her shoulder. Pa? Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed. She was talking all night, saying things about the river, about stones being thrown. Caleb felt Margaret's forehead, still burning. "Go rest by the fire. I'll take over." He had seen fever dreams before, had nursed Elizabeth through her final illness. But this was different. Margaret's body fought not just infection, but something deeper. Shame and fury warred beneath her skin. He prepared a willow bark tea, adding precious herbs from Elizabeth's garden. When Margaret's eyes fluttered open, he helped her drink. "Where?" Her voice was rough. "Safe. You're safe here." She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain. "I should go. You don't need—" "Lie still," he said firmly. "Those wounds need time, and you're in no state to go anywhere." From the main room came the clatter of breakfast preparations. Thomas's voice drifted in. "But why can't I see her?" Quote, "Because I said so," Sarah replied, sounding far older than 13. "Now eat your porridge." Margaret turned her face to the wall. "Your children shouldn't. I'm not fit company." "My children have seen hardship," Caleb said quietly. "They'll survive seeing kindness too." Something in that simple statement broke through her defenses. Her eyes filled, but still she didn't cry. Just lay there, tears sliding silently into the pillow. Caleb pretended not to notice, busying himself with checking her bandages. The wounds looked angry, but not infected yet. He applied fresh honey, trying to be gentle, though every touch made her flinch. "Emma found you," he said conversationally. "She's got a gift for finding things. Lost calves, arrowheads, apparently people too. Tell her thank you. Tell her yourself when you're better." A knock at the cabin door made them both freeze. Caleb's hand went to the pistol at his hip. "Stone, you in there?" The voice was familiar. "Dr. Henry Mills from town." Caleb relaxed slightly. Mills was a good man, one of the few. Sarah let the doc in. The elderly physician entered, medical bag in hand, eyes troubled. "Heard you might have a patient for me." News travels fast. Emma mentioned it to the Watson boy, who told his ma, "Well, you know how it goes." He looked toward the bedroom. "May I?" Caleb glanced at Margaret. After a moment, she nodded. Dr. Mills examined her with professional detachment, though Caleb saw his jaw tighten at the extent of the damage. "Clean work with the honey," he said. "Elizabeth's recipe," Caleb answered. "She learned it from her grandmother. Good woman, your wife." The doctor sighed. "These wounds, I wasn't there. Want you to know that. I was delivering the Henley baby, came back to find it done." "Would you have stopped it?" Margaret's question was barely a whisper. Mills met her eyes honestly. "I don't know. I hope so. But hoping and doing are different things, aren't they?" He closed his bag. "Keep the wounds clean. I'll leave laudanum for the pain." "No," Margaret's voice was stronger. "No laudanum. The pain will be considerable." Quote, "I'll manage." Mills looked like he wanted to argue but didn't. "I'll check back in a few days, Caleb." A word outside. The doctor lit his pipe with shaking hands once they were beyond the door. "They're saying she's cursed. That helping her brings a curse on your household. They say a lot of things. Theodore Walsh is telling folks she bewitched him. That's why he couldn't get her with child. Mayor Blackwood's backing him up." Caleb spat into the dirt. "Theodore Walsh couldn't get a cow with calf if you locked him in the barn with her." "Despite everything," Mills chuckled. "That may be, but the town's worked up. You sure you want this trouble?" "I buried my wife 2 winters back, raised 3 children alone. Trouble and I are old acquaintances." Mills studied him. "Your Elizabeth would be proud. She'd be furious at what they did to that woman." "That, too." The doctor mounted his horse. "Be careful, Caleb. Fear makes people do terrible things." After he left, Caleb found Emma hovering by Margaret's door, clutching something behind her back. "What have you got there, little bird?" She produced a rag doll worn from loving. "Mama made her. I thought the lady might like to hold her. When I'm scared, Bessie helps." Caleb's throat tightened. "That's kind of you. Go on, but quiet like." Emma tiptoed into the room. Margaret was awake, staring at the ceiling. The little girl approached the bed like one might a wounded animal. "I brought Bessie," Emma whispered. "She's good at keeping bad dreams away." Margaret turned her head slowly. The child's earnest face, the offered doll, such simple kindness, undid her more than any cruelty could. She accepted the doll with trembling hands. "Thank you," she managed. Emma beamed. "Pa says you're staying with us. I'm glad. Sarah burns the biscuits, but don't tell her I said so." "Emma Stone!" Sarah appeared in the doorway, hands on hips. "You little tattletale." "It's true!" "Out, you scamp. Let Miss Margaret rest." But Margaret's lips had curved in the ghost of a smile, the first since the river. Caleb saw it and felt something ease in his chest. The days blurred together. Margaret's fever broke on the third night, leaving her weak but lucid. She insisted on helping with small tasks, mending, peeling potatoes, anything to not feel like a burden. The children adapted quickly. Thomas showed her his collection of bird eggs. Sarah asked her advice on needlework. Emma simply chattered, filling the silence with stories. On the fifth day, Margaret managed to walk to the porch. The October air was crisp, the cottonwoods turning gold. She sat carefully, watching Caleb split wood. The rhythmic thunk of the axe was soothing. "I had a garden once," she said suddenly. "Roses and vegetables all mixed together." Theodore said it was unseemly. "Nothing unseemly about growing things." "No," she said softly, pulling the borrowed shawl tighter. "I suppose not." That evening, over a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Thomas asked the question everyone else had avoided. "Are you going to stay forever?" "Thomas!" Sarah kicked him under the table. "It's all right." Margaret set down her spoon carefully. "I don't know where else to go. My family's back east. They wouldn't want me now." "Why not?" Emma's innocent question hung in the air. Caleb cleared his throat. Sometimes families have foolish ideas about what matters. "Well, I think you should stay," Emma declared. "Sarah's happier with another lady around, and Pa doesn't frown as much." "Emma." But it was true. The cabin felt different with Margaret there. Fuller somehow, less haunted by absence. That night, Caleb found her on the porch again, wrapped in a quilt, studying the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Habit now, I suppose." She shifted, making room for him on the bench. "Your children are remarkable." "They've had to be. You've done well with them." "Elizabeth would," she stopped. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't speak of her." "Why not? She's part of this place, part of us." He was quiet a moment. "She'd have liked you." She had strong opinions about people who mistake cruelty for righteousness. "I used to think I was righteous," Margaret said softly. "Following all the rules. Doing what was expected. Look where it got me." Quote, "Following rules and doing right aren't always the same thing." She turned to look at him then. Really look. In the moonlight, she could see the lines that grief and hard work had carved into his face, but also the kindness in his eyes, the steadiness of his hands. "Why did you take me in, really?" Caleb considered. "My parents died on the trail west. I was 15, responsible for my little sister. A family of strangers took us in. Fed us, clothed us, taught us how to survive. The husband couldn't have children. Some folks whispered curses then too. But they loved us like their own. That's what saved us." What happened to them? Quote, "Cholera, 8 years back. They're buried on their land up north." "Good people." He nodded. "They showed me family isn't always about blood or law. It's about choosing to care for each other." Margaret sat alone after he went inside, holding Emma's doll, thinking about choosing and being chosen, about the difference between a house where she'd been tolerated and a cabin where she was welcome. The wounds on her back still pulled with every movement and would scar forever. But for the first time since the river, she thought she might survive this. From the loft came Emma's small, sleepy voice. "Pa, is Miss Margaret going to be our new mama?" "Hush now, sleep," Caleb answered softly. "That's not ours to decide, little bird." Margaret pressed the doll to her chest and finally let herself cry, not from pain or shame, but from the terrible, wonderful possibility of hope. The whispers started at church. Margaret had been with the Stone family for 2 weeks when Caleb decided she was healed enough to attend Sunday service. She'd protested, saying the wound still pulled, the stairs would be unbearable. But Sarah had quietly laid out one of Elizabeth's dresses, and Emma had picked late wildflowers for her hair. "We don't hide," Caleb said simply. "That's not our way." The ride to town in the wagon was quiet. Thomas sat rigid beside his father, fists clenched. He'd heard the talk at the general store, knew what people were saying. Sarah held Margaret's hand while Emma hummed hymns, either oblivious or brave enough to act like it. They felt the change before they saw it. Conversations dying mid-sentence, heads turning, mothers pulling children closer. Margaret kept her eyes forward, spine straight despite the pain. She had learned that bearing long ago. The church was small, whitewashed, its steeple pointing toward a sky that felt more like judgment than grace. Reverend Morrison stood at the door greeting parishioners. His face was careful but kind when he saw them. "Caleb, children." His eyes flickered to Margaret. "Ma'am." "Reverend." Caleb's tone was calm but firm. "Fine morning for worship." They took their usual pew, Elizabeth's old choice, third from the front. The whispers rose like flies in summer. Margaret heard fragments. Shameless, living in sin, those poor children. Across the aisle sat Theodore Walsh, his new wife Sarah Morton, wearing Margaret's old Sunday dress. It had been altered to fit, but Margaret recognized every stitch. Their eyes met briefly. The girl flushed and looked away. The sermon was on redemption. Reverend Morrison's voice was steady, but his words about forgiveness and stone-throwing hung heavy in the air. Margaret felt the weight of every stare pressing against her back, harder than any whip. After the service, as the Stone family moved toward the door, their path was blocked. Mayor Blackwood stood there with Theodore Walsh and 3 other men: Samuel Hodge, who'd wielded the whip, Jacob Thornton, the rancher, and Wade Garrett, who'd once called himself a man of God. "Stone," the mayor said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "A word. Not in front of my children." "Your children are exactly why we need to talk." Blackwood's gaze turned to Margaret. "You've taken in a cursed woman. Bad enough for you, but those young ones don't deserve." "The only curse I see," Caleb interrupted, voice calm but cold, "is grown men confusing cruelty for righteousness." Theodore stepped forward, his face red with anger. "She's barren. 3 years I wasted." "That's enough." Margaret's voice cut through the air, clear, steady. "Yes, I couldn't give you children, Theodore, but perhaps the failing wasn't all mine." A ripple of gasps ran through the crowd. A woman didn't speak so to a man, especially not her former husband. Theodore's hand twitched as if to strike her, but 10-year-old Thomas Stone stepped between them, chin high. "You don't touch her." Caleb's voice was low, warning, proud. "Thomas." Wade Garrett laughed, ugly and loud. "Boys got more backbone than sense." Caleb put his hand on Thomas's shoulder, the other at Margaret's back. "We're leaving. Good day, gentlemen." "This isn't over, Stone," Blackwood called after them. "You're harboring." But the Stone family kept walking, heads high, children flanking Margaret like tiny guards. The whispers followed them down the dusty street. The ride home was silent. Thomas trembled with anger. Sarah looked pale, and even Emma had gone quiet. Margaret stared straight ahead, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I shouldn't have come," she said softly. "I've brought trouble to your door." "Trouble was already here," Caleb replied. "Now it just has a face." That night, Margaret found him checking locks and loading his rifle. "You think they'll come?" "Maybe. Garrett's been drinking heavy. And Theodore's pride is hurt." She hesitated. "You can't keep fighting for me. The children." "The children," Caleb interrupted gently, "just learned that standing for what's right matters more than standing with what's popular." A sound from the yard cut him off. Horses, 3 riders, lanterns swaying. Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to the door. "Stay inside." Margaret followed anyway. Garrett, Hodge and a third man she didn't know sat at the gate, their faces twisted in the flickering light. "Stone!" Garrett slurred. "Send out the woman." "The town's decided she goes tonight." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in plain sight. "Only thing decided is you men are drunk and stupid. Go home." "You got children in there," one of them sneered. "Shame if something." The rifle rose fast as thought. "Finish that sentence." "Stop this," Margaret said suddenly, stepping into the light. "I'll go." Quote. "No," came Sarah's voice behind her. The girl stood barefoot, her father's pistol steady in her hands. "You won't." "Sarah." "No, Pa. They want to hurt her for something that's not even wrong. Mama couldn't have babies at first." "Was she cursed? Should she have been whipped too?" Quote. The men shifted uneasily. Elizabeth Stone had been beloved in town. Garrett muttered, "That's different." "How?" Thomas demanded, stepping out with a pitchfork. Even little Emma appeared in the doorway, eyes wide but fearless. "Why are the men yelling?" The sight, a family standing together against the darkness, gave the men pause. Finally, Hodge lowered his rope. "This ain't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is," Caleb said quietly. "You come again, and you'll find out how over it is." The riders left, their horses' hoofbeats fading into the cold night. Caleb didn't lower the rifle until silence returned. Inside, Margaret trembled. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered. "They'll never stop." Caleb's voice softened. "They'll stop when they see fear doesn't rule this house. My children just learned courage tonight. I won't teach them to run from what's right." Emma climbed into Margaret's lap, still half asleep. "We're family now," she murmured. "Family protects each other." Margaret wrapped her arms around the child, her heart breaking open in quiet wonder. Later, when the house had gone still, she found Caleb at the window, rifle still nearby. "They'll make your life miserable," she said softly. "Your work, your reputation. I've got good land and strong hands. Don't need their approval to feed my family." "But the children, what happens when they're teased? Called names?" "Already happens. Their mother's dead, remember?" He turned from the window. "Margaret, my children just faced down armed men for you. What does that tell you about where you belong?" She had no answer, only the steady beat of her heart against the ache of his words. "I won't be the reason this family suffers." "Too late," he said, smiling faintly. "Emma's already decided you're staying, and nobody crosses Emma Stone." Quote. The October wind rattled the shutters, but inside, warmth and light filled the little cabin. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't feel like a burden. She felt like home. Weeks passed. The town's stares softened, then turned to silence. The Stones kept to their work. Margaret healed, her scars fading to pale reminders. She helped Sarah sew, taught Emma to read, and worked beside Caleb, bringing in the last of the harvest. One morning, as snow began to fall over the prairie, Caleb called her to the porch. "Doc Mills says the preacher's been asking after us. Thinks we ought to make things proper." Margaret met his eyes. "And what do you think?" Quote. He stepped closer, his voice low and certain. "I think you're already my wife in every way that counts, but if you'd let me, I'd like to make it true before God and man." For a long moment, she couldn't breathe. Then she nodded. Yes. The wedding was simple. Reverend Morrison, the children, and a handful of kind souls who'd stood by them. Margaret wore Elizabeth's dress, mended with her own hands. When Caleb took her hand and said, "I promise to honor your strength, not your scars," she finally let herself believe she was loved for who she was, not what she lacked. That night, after the vows and the laughter, Margaret stood outside beneath the cold stars, her heart full. Caleb came up behind her, arms wrapping gently around her waist. "You're home now," he whispered. "I've been home," she answered, "since the day Emma found me by the river." The wind sighed through the cottonwoods, carrying with it the ghosts of old pain, but also the promise of peace. Margaret Stone. Once Margaret Walsh, the woman they had tried to break, had become something stronger. Not cursed, not barren, but reborn in the family she'd helped heal. And when she closed her eyes that night, listening to the soft breathing of the children and the steady heartbeat of the man beside her, she knew the truth at last. Sometimes, the greatest blessings rise from the deepest wounds.